Hello and welcome to video number 6 for Biblical Heritage. I feel like my face is like a ghost of white, but that's okay. So anyways, we are going to be talking about chapters 7, 9, and 11. In the last video, I went over chapters 6, 8, and 10, and I broke them up for a certain reason because chapters 7, 9, and 11 specifically talk about sex. I know sex is such a fun thing to talk about, especially for, a Baylor Baptist class. But I mean, why not dig into it? Especially in the Feminine Mystique, she does talk about sex in different kind of ways. And so I thought that I would run through these chapters and then I'm going to compare them to different women in the Bible that we have talked about. We've definitely already talked about women in the Old Testament, like Sarah and Hagar, but we're also going to talk about some other women that we have talked about in class, which is Deborah, Jael, Shapan, I don't know how to say her name correctly, Huldah, and then also a little bit about Proverbs 31, which we also talked about in class. So this is what that video is going to be about. So let's dig in. So for chapter 7 in the Feminine Mystique, Frieden talks about more women going to college and how, but also even though that more American women were going to college kind of in the 1950s, 1960s, they were going to college to meet a guy. And I've definitely heard that at Baylor here, which is a really odd thing. But I've heard it especially from girls who live in Collins their freshman year, that they're here at Baylor only to meet a husband, and I think that's ridiculous. Like, what kind of times are we living in? But it's true, and it's kind of true today as it was true back in the 1950s and 60s. But, once a woman found a guy in college, she would probably drop out. It says that 2/3 of women were dropping out of college in those times, probably because they met the guy and they were good, which is crazy to me. But a really big point that Frieden talks about in the book is that college educators were teaching women how to be housewives and mothers instead of teaching them how to be scholars and how to pursue their own interests instead of the interests of, a guy that they liked. A lot of educators at this time, if women were going to college, which many women did, they were teaching them, how to have the perfect etiquette at a dinner, or how to please your man, or how to even do the dishes. They didn't focus on these, on actually, things that even women in college learn today, which is how to grow into your fullest self. Moving into chapter 9, So chapter 7 was about selling sex in school, specifically college. And in chapter 9, she talks about something called the sexual sell, which means that marketing and advertising focused on selling to wives and mothers. And it promoted this idea of you can be a better housewife if you buy product X, They kind of made it seem that women have to stay in the kitchen, or they need to be in the laundry room, and that you shouldn't go out of the house for any reason. I mean, there were toys that they could buy for their kids, but that was it. So basically, buying a certain product is going to make you more feminine. It's going to make your sex, your female sex, better. So that was the idea, and which was really stupid. Chapter 11 was actual sex, like biological sex, like you are a female because you're born that way. So basically, if women are only seen for their beauty and their housewifery, then they're degraded simply to what their sex can provide biologically. And it was no surprise that women were expected to fulfill this unreal sexual image, or fantasy, when they're actually having sex or performing with a guy. And basically what I wrote on here was that this takes the woman's personality away from her when having sex with her husband. And I just thought that was a really interesting point. So that's what all chapter 11 was about, and also chapters 7 and 9, just all about sex. So then let's talk about some of the women from class and try to fit in some of the sex talk from the Feminine Mystique and put that into women, specific women in the Bible, and how did they kind of fit the roles that women did in the 1950s and 60s. So we've already talked a little bit about Sarah, who was particularly a housewife, a mom. She got impatient with having no children, bearing no children. She put her, she had a lack of faith in God, and so she decided to do things her own way and made her maidservant, Hagar, do it for her to sleep with her husband, Abram. She took the matter into her own hands. And she eventually despised Hagar. And then we have Hagar herself, and basically her role in this whole thing is that she is just another person who a male's name is to be passed through. Basically, that the only thing that she's good for is, first of all, doing anything for Sarah, which she did, and having children, again, which she did. And then we talked a little bit about Deborah, who led Israel, and she held court under the palm of Deborah in the country of Ephraim, I think is correct, and says that the Lord will deliver Sisera into the hands of a woman, which I've talked a little bit about this, but it's basically degrading her own sex, which is really ironic because she's such a strong female leader. But she commanded an army of over 10,000 men, which was pretty cool. Then we have Jael, who hid Sisera in her tent and then took care of him, and then eventually killed him with a tent peg and a hammer. And then she showed Barak what she did. We have Shapan, I don't know how to say her name correctly. Basically, she read the book of the law, which is something that it's a role that women were not usually appointed to. She read the book to the king, and it led to a very strong reaction, so that she was sent with other men to inquire about what was written in the book. And then you have this woman named Huldah, who was a prophet and told the women and the other messengers that she told them information, and that answer got taken back to the king. And then we have Proverbs 31, which doesn't have any woman in specific, but it talks about the role of a mother. Basically, this mother taught King Lemuel that things like alcohol is bad and it leads to bad decisions. But then in the latter half of 31, she talks about the wife being of noble character, and to plant a vineyard. And then a woman has certain characteristics, and those are strength, dignity, wisdom, and she will have a husband who praises her as well. I think the best kind of comparisons that can be made between these women and then also the chapters in the Feminine Mystique is that things that we've talked about before. Biological sex is obviously the most important thing about being a female, and one might say that it's actually the only thing that should be considered as a female, that you are only as good as what your sex can provide. But kind of talking about the sexual cell, which was chapter 9, there was marketing and advertising for women, and at these times, you had paper ads, you had magazines and books, and you had radio, and you also had television that was coming into play a little bit. And I think it's kind of interesting that maybe even in the biblical times, there were also ways to market and advertise to women, like, use this basket probably to better collect water or something, because it's going to be, easier for you to carry or something like that. I think that was definitely the idea. And I think that just an attitude in general in the more biblical times was for women to be staying in the household, to be staying in that kitchen setting, to be staying in, to be staying in the home and in a house, which is really different compared to Deborah, who was a woman of who had those characteristics that were described in Proverbs 31, strength and dignity. She definitely was a strong woman, but she led this huge army, and she kind of did her own thing, to be honest with you. What we have talked about in class, which was interesting, is that Proverbs 31 does not really talk about at all the biological functions of the female. It doesn't talk about having sex or a woman being beautiful for her physical appearances. We have all of these different women who were seen mostly for their different attributes and their sense of character instead of their physical beauty on the outside. And all throughout the Bible, it's really odd that it actually doesn't really mention their physical attributes. Instead, it's, look, there's a cat. I told you guys you would probably see her sometime in the video. Anyways, getting back on track. These women are seen for what they can bring to the table, what God has guided them to be. And I mean, there's a reason why they're in the Bible. Whoever decided to compile all the different parts of the Bible together, thought, well, these women are important enough, let's put them in here. And they serve as role models and examples for us, women and men, to look to for a sense of guidance on how women should act, how women should be, and what the attributes actually are of women. And kind of bringing that more into the feminine mystique, I think that back in the 50s and 60s, I mean, I'm pretty for sure they took from rules from the Bible, but they didn't really take all of those rules. Look at cat again. But they definitely took the biological sense that a woman is supposed to be a housewife and mother. But other than that, they kind of exploded on this huge sexual identity kind of a thing. Like, women are supposed to be sexual. I don't mean sexual identity as in the orientation. I mean sexual identity as in, like, you are a female. You have breasts and you have long hair, you have makeup or something like that. You're supposed to act feminine. And if these things are considered feminine, which they definitely were, you need to be using them. And that was the big sex push. But back in the Bible times, you don't see women doing that, especially not at least in the Bible. I mean, I'm pretty for sure that women, were trying to act attractive and appealing to men, but at the same time, they were also trying to survive, And with the lack of resources that they had at that point, I mean, they did what they could with what they had. And I think a woman's beauty and appearance were more seen in her personality and what she could do to provide as a mother and a housewife rather than just her look. So I do think that's a very significant difference between biblical women and the women who are discussed in the feminine mystique of the 50s and 60s. I think, yeah, those are just my, opinions of it. I think times have definitely changed. Times have changed, of course, but even since the 50s and 60s, I feel like women are now looking towards the Bible for more, I guess, kind of biblical roles in a sense. We're looking at things like Proverbs 31 that say woman has strength and she has dignity and she has character and, she's beautiful because she can do all these things. I think women today are looking more towards that kind of image in the Bible rather than the sexual cell, even though the media kind of has been exploding on that, just because that is what's being promoted today. You see that a lot with like Emma Watson in the UN. I mean, there's tons of other examples. Malala is a really good example. I mean, that girl was seen for wanting an education more than anything, and that's what she fought for. That's what she almost died for, literally. And I think that women today are definitely more attracted to those roles, and I think men are even more attracted to women of strong personality, strong character, instead of the perfect body or, looking extremely feminine. So that's my opinion. I hope you guys liked the video. And I'm sorry, there was a major change. It went from being daylight, and then I went to go do something, and then it became night again, so I had to provide different lighting, and I look different, but it's all good. Have a good night.